Welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darren Lundberg.
And today we're going to talk about Goodfellas, 1990, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Ray Liotta. But before we do that, let's do a quick recap for our last episode. Darren, we had a guest and we talked about Face Off. What was that like?
Well, again, you had to step out because of work, so I was able to interview critic Sarah M. Fetters about Face Off. We chatted extensively about John Woo, action movies, especially the outlandishness of that movie and how a lot of it was grounded in a lot of emotion, a lot of like directorial flourishes, especially the end performances. John Travolta and Nicolas Cage just having so much fun, just kind of like playing each other, but not in an over-the-top way. Like you describe it to people and it seems, you get an image in your head of, oh, it's going to be wild and crazy, but it's not really that. It's like a lot more subtle gestures and, the way that they talk, like stuff like that. And it was just a lot of fun, especially talking about John Woo and how, I think the 80s, his Hong Kong stretch of action movies are so prolific and so like iconic and all those things that kind of made a stamp on action cinema forever. So seeing him come over and do, US in the US do that style that he was accustomed to is just fantastic. And then we came back and had a chat about how you felt about the movie, and you felt a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I had a change of heart, really. I still really enjoy the movie. I think it's fun, entertaining, but I had a hard time getting over the ridiculousness of the premise and the idea of the movie of having two people switch faces. I couldn't get past that. It was kind of jokey and silly for me, but still fun. I still love the John Woo-isms, and I still will watch this movie and enjoy it whenever I do. So,
right. So yeah. Again, great conversation. Sarah's a great conversationalist and a great critic. Again, very personal in her writing. So again, check her out. Check out her writing, all that stuff, her blog, and then Movie Freak Sarah on Twitter. But yeah, and then our episode also was great. So yeah, let's go ahead and we'll leave that kind of life of crime behind and like delve into a new life of crime.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do it. Let's talk about Goodfellas. But before we do, let's watch the trailer.
Okay.
Never rat on your friends, and always keep your mouth shut.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Hey, Mom, what do you think?
You look like a gangster.
I know
By the time I grew up, there was $30 billion a year in cargo moving through Idlewild Airport. Believe me, we tried to steal every bit of it.
What do?
I'm in construction.
He's not Jewish.
Mazel tov.
For most of the guys, killings got to be accepted.
Hey, Henry, here's an arm.
Very funny, guys.
Here's a leg.
Here's a wing. What do you like, the leg or the wing?
For us, to live any other way was nuts. And we were treated like movie stars with muscle. We had it all just for the asking.
It's gonna be a good summer.
It was a glorious time.
In a world that's powered by violence, on the streets where the violent have power, a new generation carries on an old tradition.
All right, here we go, Darren. Goodfellas, 1990, starts the decade off with a bang. Martin Scorsese, of course, we have to talk about him. Very prolific director, does some great work over his career. And honestly, if I had to pick one, Goodfellas is probably my favorite Martin Scorsese movie, and or Martin Scorsese picture, I should say, because he always listed as Scorsese picture.
Gotta get that right.
Yeah, but I've always really enjoyed this movie. I know, I first saw it at your house, I believe, and it just really kind of stayed with me for a long time after I watched it. Like I remember just being like, "Wow, what was that?" Kind of my same reaction I had with Pulp Fiction. It was kind of like that was something. That was an experience. Like I just felt like, I could, the characters were so engaging. Everything was so like. The world that they created, just being a part of that life and seeing how they live, it was so fascinating. It was so like wow, because it was so foreign to me. It's so different from the way I live. And so it was fun to kind of like try to put yourself in their shoes and be like, how would it be to live in this life? Even though what they're doing is like super evil and super, these horrible things that they're doing. It's kind of fun to watch these people live this kind of lifestyle. And it's always been intriguing to me. And so whenever it's on, I had to sit and watch it, or I'll probably watch it once or twice a year because I'm so fascinated by it. And whenever it, comes on TV, I sit and watch it. And I just finished watching it just now, and man, I still can't get over how good this movie is. I even though we had a guest mention that it's probably not something you're nostalgic for. I'm nostalgic for it. Like I love this movie, and I could watch it and never get tired of it. So, in fact, I think it's probably a movie I put on my top 10 list in the past before. It might not still be there, but it's a really, really good movie. Very, very high ranking movie in my book.
Yeah.
But so what was your first experience with the movie?
Well, I know I didn't see this in a theater. I was a little bit too young to get wrapped up in the world of gangsters and murder. Like, even though like RoboCop, I'd already been like entrenched in that, 3 years before. And Scorsese, I think I was familiar with his name, even though I really hadn't dived into his filmography. I think I was familiar with him because he came onto the scene with Spielberg and with Lucas and Coppola and
Right.
De Palma, like the movie brats, the new Hollywood movement.
And he wore those big black framed glasses, so that was like a giveaway. That was
right. They're like, even though they're older than us, we recognized like the movie nerds in them and kind of how they've used all of their history with 30s and 40s and 50s, all those movies that they grew up with, and how they integrated it into their movies. So I was aware of that. But again, I don't know if I saw Goodfellas before or after the Oscars. I'm not quite sure of the release date of Goodfellas and when it was released on video. I do know that I saw go up against Dances with Wolves at the Oscars, and I think Ghost was also nominated that year of all things. But and then finally I was able to watch this on video. And I think I've mentioned before that during the summer my mom would send me to New York to spend time with my family, and so every day my grandpa and I would go down to the video store. We'd rent a movie and bring it back. And so I would rent like anything and everything except for like the horror movies, even though you would pass by those covers and be like, oh, like I want to see that movie about like the faceless skeletons, that kind of thing, and the Gorgor girls and all those things like we talked about with Lindsay. But and then renting like Eddie Murphy Raw, Eddie Murphy Delirious, and my grandpa being really uncomfortable with all the F-bombs that Eddie Murphy dropped in that. So I guess renting Goodfellas was kind of a respite from that kind of thing. But again, it had a reputation. So when I finally rented it and we watched it, I just remember the movie making me really uncomfortable.
Okay.
I remember, and it's a different kind of uncomfortable than, we'll talk about some other movies that have that same effect, but it was more like it did such a good job. I recognized even back then when I was 13, 14, whatever, of entrenching you in this world, that when you kind of felt exhausted by the movie, right? And so when it ended, you're like, oh, I don't want to live like that. And so that's the impression that it left on me. And then I think buying it on VHS or the widescreen versions, I know that, I don't know if you remember that, me being addicted to those when they would release widescreen versions on VHS.
I do remember that, yeah.
And Goodfellas was one of them. And so I'm pretty sure, like, we watched it at my house, and I don't remember if I gave you the choice and you picked it, or I told you have to watch this. I don't remember.
Yeah, you forced me to watch it. You're like, hey, watch this. You have to watch this.
You have to watch this. If we're serious cinephiles, you have to start watching what it says. And so, yeah, we sat, and I think since 1990, since that first rental, I've seen this movie maybe a dozen times. And it still has the same kind of pull, the same kind of power. And I think that's a testament to the strength of the movie. I don't, like you said, this is probably your favorite Scorsese. I think maybe I have a couple ahead of it, just because I have some issues with the pacing and stuff like that with this one. We'll talk about that. But yeah, it did such a good job of enveloping you in this world. And I think that's rare. And it ranks like at the top of the gangster movie pile, right? Like if you're talking top gangster or mafia or mobster movies, it's the Goodfellas or it's the Godfather, right? Or even Godfather 2 that comes in.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching a documentary about the making of The Sopranos once, and they kind of interviewed the actors, and each one of them were asked, "What's your favorite mafia movie?" And they all answered either The Godfather or Goodfellas. Like you didn't really get much deeper than that. Those were the top two answers, and I have to say, for me personally, I prefer Goodfellas over The Godfather. I think Goodfellas has, I'm not sure what your issue with the pacing is, but I think it has good pacing. It keeps you engaged the whole time, keeps you interested, and keeps you involved in this world. And The Godfather for me is kind of slow, and it's almost just too long. It takes forever to get through it. I still can say I like The Godfather. Don't get me wrong, I like The Godfather. It's just I would prefer to watch Goodfellas over The Godfather.
Yeah,
But
I think there's controversy with this movie. I know people are like, "Oh, Scorsese likes to glorify or romanticize like the mafia life," and I don't, I don't think that's what this is at all. You know what I mean? If you're looking at it, I think The Godfather does a more pervasive job of romanticizing that life because it makes it about family and all the, you know, Vito Corleone has morals, you know, about the drugs. It's kind of like Paulie has in this one, so they kind of have that similarity. But you know, Corleone has morals. It's about the family. It's about Michael coming in and taking over, and it's that's more romanticized because it's more, again, it's a romantic POV of that life, and so it's not a realistic point of view as much as this is a realistic point of view, and that's
well,
what
yeah,
I'm talking about.
it's based on a true story. Henry Hill was a real person, you know. Jimmy, the Gent Burke, you know, who Jimmy Conway is based off of, whatever. They're real people. So it's not that he's telling a romantic story. He's just saying this is what happened. Like there was the Lufthansa heist that really happened. They did steal $6 million, which would have been like what, 25 million today. And they did have all these, you know, crazy things happen. They were, you know, murderers, and they were these, you know, bad people, and this stuff happened. So for me, it's almost kind of like a documentary, even though it's not. It's just kind of fun to like look at it that way because, you know, based on true events type thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of ugliness to Goodfellas. I mean, there's ugliness in The Godfather, but I think again the difference with The Godfather is all the characters have like a moral code that they stick by, and it even though again they're killers, you identify with that and you kind of empathize with them. It's easier to like them in the Godfather. In here, there are flashes, especially with the Tommy character and the Jimmy characters, of real shocking, ugly violence and unrepentant stuff. And it's just a lot of this movie is repulsive, and it's teaching it's purposely teaching you that. So again, just to get that right out of the way, when people say that it glorifies that life, I don't think that at all. Like even from Henry when he's a young man, and there's just so much ugliness, you're kind of like, he's getting wrapped up in it, but I don't think we get wrapped up in it as much.
Right. Well, I did want to mention quickly that it was fun for me to watch it this time and kind of pick out the actors that I have grown fond of in The Sopranos, because you see a lot of that. You see Lorraine Bracco, you know, and Karen in The Goodfellas. And then she's Tony's psychiatrist in Sopranos. And then you got, you know, Michael Imperioli. Is it Imperioli or Imperioli?
I think Imperioli.
Imperioli. Okay, so Michael Imperioli, who plays Spider, a little small part, who Joe Pesci shoots in the foot and then, you know, kills. He ends up being a really major part in The Sopranos, Christopher, which I think he's awesome in The Sopranos. But anyway, it was fun for me to kind of go back and watch these actors that I've really, like I said, grown fond of, and go, oh, hey, there they are. So kind of cool.
Yeah. So I guess the main thing, like when you talk about it not being like this, you can't be nostalgic for Goodfellas, even though you can, right? you can. We can go. It's nostalgia is about just reminiscing about the times that we watched it and how we felt versus how we felt now. All those things, right? But like tackling like Back to the Future, tackling all the movies that, you know, It's a Wonderful Life or Terminator 2 that we covered, where everybody's already said everything that needs to be said about it. So that was always my pushback with doing movies like that, because it's like, what do we have to add to that conversation that hasn't already been said? But I think like our focus here should be like just the joy of movie watching and how much Scorsese is a part of that. I don't think he gets as much respect today. It's kind of, and Spielberg is the same thing. Coppola is the same thing, because they made such good, impactful, not just good, great, classic, impactful, influential movies back in the 70s and even the 80s, right? Spielberg kind of let that grow into Schindler's List and Jurassic Park into the 90s. Scorsese had this. He had Casino was really big, obviously. So, you know, I still don't think that people are giving Scorsese the right amount of respect for what he's able to do and the mastery that he has of his craft. I think and I don't know if you agree with me here, but like Spielberg he's got the talent, but he's also got a blockbuster mentality that he's able to do what he wants to do and have his personality up on screen, but also make cajillions of dollars with every movie, right? I don't think Scorsese is that same way. He's tackling a lot of things that are like hard for people to watch. You're not going to have like Goodfellas gross $1 billion. It's not that kind of movie, right?
Right.
And
I would say I do agree with that. I think Spielberg, appeals more to the masses, and I think Scorsese has more of a kind of like a cult following. He has people who like just appreciate him as a filmmaker, where like you say, Spielberg is more like he's more willing to make a movie that everyone's going to love.
Yeah.
But I agree with that for sure.
But as far as Scorsese's mastery of the craft, it's impeccable. And especially if you watch this movie again, every time I put this movie on, I'm reminded this is a freaking movie. How Clarence says in True Romance, like that was a movie, about. And there's just so much life to every single shot in this movie, and a purpose to every needle drop, to every acting choice, to every costume and all this stuff. It's just incredible. And like you said, there's such an energy to it. But I think that should be our focus. You're talking about how much we love that. And with Scorsese, again, I think he's got that mastery of, he's not just the gangster guy. I think that's funny too. Even though Mean Streets was his first, I think, big hit that got him on the scene, even though he made movies before that. And then, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, King of Comedy, Last Temptation of Christ, Color of Money, I think, which is a hired man job, I think, even though that's got a good energy to it. But, I don't know, like you watch his movies and everything he's done, like even though the movie brats have taken cues from people before them, he's made films that are so impeccable that people have taken cues from him, like Spielberg or Coppola or Lucas, even if we don't recognize that's what they're doing. And I think it's so important that we watch what Scorsese's doing. Sure, he has his like occasional movies like Cape Fear or Shutter Island, stuff like that are more entertainment.
Okay.
But Goodfellas, Last Temptation of Christ, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, these are all indelible movies that are about asking questions. He's got something on his mind. It's his Catholicism that feeds into every movie, the stuff about guilt and sinners that are the focus of every single Scorsese movie. Obviously, we want to talk about the needle drops in this movie and what, how it's not just music for music's sake. There is a purpose to all the music. And I do want to chat about that. I want to chat about the shot choices and the editing choices. And there's a difference in film, in the visual language of this movie from the first frame to the last. And it just depends on what Scorsese's trying to say, right? I mean, what are some other like Scorseseisms that you really like?
Well, I wanted to talk about that for sure, because I like it when you can tell the director just by his stamp that he puts on the movie. And you can tell a Scorsese movie, maybe not so much with movies like The Aviator or Shutter Island or even The Departed doesn't really feel like, for me anyway, a Scorsese picture. But, like you mentioned, Raging Bull and Casino and Goodfellas and all these movies that he's made with, the kind of the mobster feel, they have like I'm not sure what it's called, but like his vision comes through. And when he has those freeze frames, or he has the quick, push ins and the compression shots that he does and the things that he does to kind of, make you feel uneasy, and all these things, they're all there for a purpose and they're all there for a reason. And it definitely gets the point across. And I like that when I watch it, I go, yep, this is a Martin Scorsese movie. So that's fun for me. I hate it when I watch a movie and I have no idea who the director is. He puts no stamp on it. He has no, personal, vision. But yes, Scorsese has a vision for every movie he makes, I think.
And he's like, I think I briefly hinted at, he's trying to figure stuff out. Like he's got a lot of things on his mind. A lot of directors use like film as like therapy. Like I think Spielberg has a saying, like, I don't need to go to a therapist because my therapy is making movies. Like my personality and work out stuff there.
Yeah.
And like I said, like you could apply the Catholicism ideal to Goodfellas. You could obviously apply it to Last Temptation of Christ. You could apply it to Raging Bull. And again, I keep mentioning Raging Bull. It's incredible that Raging Bull kicked off the 80s, and like people from Ebert, Pauline Kael, I think even was a big fan of Raging Bull. You could tell from the beginning that was going to be the movie of the decade, it seemed. And I think it's the same thing with Goodfellas. Like Goodfellas came out and Roger Ebert put his finger, and Siskel put their finger on it, saying this is going to be one of the great movies of the decade. And it is just because of the questions that are trying to be asked here. I can't emphasize that enough. This isn't just entertainment for entertainment's sake. And I
Right.
wonder if people aren't picking up on that. Like, do they watch Goodfellas and they push back against it because it's not, I mean, it's trying to teach them something and there's a language. I don't know. What do you think about that? Why do you think people don't, like audiences today that are more IP focused? Why do you think people aren't
Well,
responding to Goodfellas?
I think today they want more surface level stuff. They don't want to have to dig deep and look for the deeper meanings in things. And back then, that's what it was all about. You had these these messages that the filmmakers were trying to get across. And so, maybe they weren't like in your face messages, but they were there, and they were like, if you look for them, you could find them.
Yeah.
And I think he was a master of doing that. But nowadays, it's more like, just show me something that explodes, and I'll be happy.
Right. Yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you do need those. We say this a lot. We need the palate cleansers, right? But when you watch a movie that's just 2 hours of explosions or 2 hours of just, massive masturbatory entertainment, right? It's just there to entertain you and to boggle your eyes and and rattle your eardrums, that kind of thing. But they're easy to make. I think what I say easy to make because they're not. I mean, you have like $200 million budgeted blockbusters, that there's a lot of crap that goes into those to make those believable, and a lot of effects, right? But when you watch a bunch of, and I equate it to fast food, not trying to be derogatory, but when you eat fast food, which is good, like, and you have it on, and it kind of hits a certain spot for you. But when you start eating too much fast food, and then all of a sudden somebody puts a gourmet meal in front of you, you're going to have two reactions. Either number one, it's going to be your taste buds are going to explode because you're like, what is this? Like, this isn't food. This isn't what I recognize from food. And like, you're all of a sudden you're like Remy in Ratatouille, where your senses are just going off, right? But then the other reaction too is you don't recognize greatness because you're so attuned to that fast food kind of assembly line process blockbuster. But I think this movie, and like I mentioned before, whenever I watch it, it's like, this is a movie. This is what movies, it awakens things in your senses. And it's kind of, it intellectually, emotionally, it affects you in a way that a lot of blockbusters don't. And I think it's kind of sad that these directors aren't quite as revered today, because they don't go for the jugular kind of thing. They kind of appeal up here instead of your gut. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely kind of in that same vein, one thing I wanted to talk about was the symbols in the movie, because they're there. Like, you have, guns are a big thing in the movie. Money obviously is a big thing. And then you have food. Like, kind of like all these things are kind of like integrated throughout the movie, and they're constantly coming up in different times. But like, the gun obviously represents like power and authority or dominance, or whatever you want to call it, where, each character, sometimes has the power. And when they have the gun, I mean, a good example is the scene where, Henry Hill defends Karen when she's assaulted by the neighbor, and he runs over and he grabs the gun and he pistol whips this guy like 11 times. It's a really graphic scene, but he just kind of like asserts his authority, by using a gun, and then the gun represents that. And then he goes and gives it to Karen to hide. And she has this moment where she has to decide, like, if she's going to, like, help
run.
Henry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it should have been a red flag. Should have been like, no, this is wrong. This guy's, obviously violent. I shouldn't be with him. But she kind of like looks at it and like, first of all, she's like impressed that he's able to defend her the way he did. And then she's kind of like intrigued by the whole, this bloody gun, and what am I going to do? But she's now he's given her some trust. He's like, I have to trust you with this. And then she has to like decide, am I going to like help him? Like, and so now she has to share the power. You know what I'm saying? So now the gun's kind of being shared between them. And you see this throughout. You see the part where she's over sitting on him in bed, and when she finds about his infidelity, and she's like got the gun, pointed at his face, and she's kind of showing, I have the power now. And then, by the way, this scene when he kind of like regains authority and kind of rips her off the bed and puts the gun in her face, that's a hard scene for me to watch. When he's really, really kind of violent with his wife, and he kind of grabs her by the hair and he shakes her against the headboard, all that stuff. I almost guarantee it probably hurt Lorraine Bracco. I feel bad for her when I watch that scene. But it's a really, really powerful scene. But now he's kind of regained authority, by doing that. And it's kind of fun to watch the authority go back and forth in the movie. And of course you got, Tommy, Joe Pesci's character, who's constantly like, the wild, crazy cowboy guy, shooting everybody, shooting Spider and all that stuff.
The wild card.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, and at the end when he shoots, at Henry, Anyway, I just think that's a fun symbol to look at throughout the movie as you're watching it, to see that, the gun, which represent power, and then of course, money, that's an easy one, because, money kind of symbolizes that, they're doing well, they've like done a major heist or something, and they now have, the wealth to show for it. And there's obviously the other scene with Karen and Henry when he's ready to leave, and she's like, wait, I want to go shopping. And I love this when she does this, but she's like, can I get some money? And he's like, how much do you need? And she's like, this much. It's like, I love that, because they don't even know how much they need. They just know they judge it by the size of the stack of the bills, so that's kind of fun to watch that. But also it's interesting too, that when she, gets the money, it's not just like, oh, thanks, honey, and like give him a kiss goodbye. She has to like perform a sexual favor for him for exchange for the money, it seems like, which is, I don't know, maybe it's just a thing in their marriage, but it also is also kind of just weird that that's something that, he gives her money and she gives him sexual favors.
Well, she's grateful, right? So
okay, yeah. But anyway, yeah, so another big one is food. And food, you see it throughout the movie. They're constantly cooking food, like when they're in prison, and they're always, mixing the sauces, like in that last scene. And it's just funny to me how integral food is for it's a cultural thing for Italians. I think that's why it's in there, obviously. But also it means, like, even though there's this crazy life they're living, they're able to come together, and have family meals. And that's kind of what keeps them together and keeps them, united, even though there's this, organized crime and this like evil enterprise that they're running.
Well, even in the jail scene, food is used as power, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what does Henry say? Like, they were able to have dinners, and it wasn't like prison life you'd expect.
And I love the end where the last thing he mentions is the fact that he can't get spaghetti and marinara sauce. He can only get egg noodles and ketchup. And it kind of symbolizes like his fall from grace, like he used to be this, important mobster who ate like, Italian cuisines, and now he has to settle for, egg noodles and ketchup, which is like, how gross is that? Now I'm just like, what's he say, schnook? Is that what he calls himself?
Yeah.
But it's just funny to kind of like, as you're watching the movie, to watch these symbols kind of be played and kind of, placed throughout the movie. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. So yeah, that's fascinating. There's so many different ways you can look at this movie and all the ways that things are applied. If we wanted to, like, I do want to talk about again the visual language of this. And you're talking about the power and the money and the guns and all, and the murder. Obviously, I like how he says, if you get whacked, like you do something out of turn, like you get whacked, so you learn how to behave, right? But it's not just. I think the difference between the movie and the book, the Nicholas Pileggi book, Wise Guy, is that the Pileggi book is kind of like, and I had this as a note. I said I like that, when they're explaining, the bemused Ray Liotta kind of narration. When he's explaining the ins and outs of Polly's, how he runs his business and everything, I think that's how the book is. I think I read it like 23 something years ago, but the book is just very clinical. It tells you all these things to the point where when they walk in the Copacabana Club, they just walk in, like that's it, right? And so I have that as a note. I like that it's a clinical explanation. But when they sat down, and again, I think Scorsese finished The Color of Money with Tom Cruise and Paul Newman, and then contacted Pileggi about, maybe turning this into a movie. And so when they were done with Color of Money, that's when they were writing the screenplay. And I think this is Scorsese's first credit since maybe Who's That Knocking at My Door? I don't know. I don't have the facts in front of him, but he did want to have enough input that he got the credit for writing this. So he and Pileggi would sit down and they would hammer out and try to adapt the book. And I think they decided not to do it like a straight narrative. They want to do it like bits and pieces and just have it feel like kind of a dream, or have it be like you're in a trance kind of thing as you're watching it. But then, like, being able, I think Scorsese's point was he wants to make it more cinematic, and he had a chance to do that when they were writing. So you're talking about the first, little bit, and it shows like young Henry, and he's kind of getting wrapped up in the world. He's already infatuated with it because he doesn't want to be a nobody, right? I think that's the thing that scares him the most, is he doesn't want to be just a normal person that's earning a paycheck and rides the subway. Like he says, those guys don't have balls. Right? He wants to be. He sees the mobsters just walking into places, getting what they want, having authority, like just being able to throw their weight around and get everything that they need. He wants that life, and it's tantalizing, right? And that's what this movie is. It's about temptation. It's about that. And, if we're going like the needle drops and stuff like that, even from the beginning, the Tony Bennett song, Rags to Riches, after he says, all my life I wanted to be a gangster, and it goes right into that song.
Yeah.
That's explaining Henry's whole journey, like rags to riches, right?
Right.
And so that's obviously the needle drop is very cinematic, very narrative driven, not just a cool song for a cool song. But then you see and I wrote this down too, like sometimes you watch a movie, I don't know, and you there's a scene and you're like, well, what was the point of that, right? That you could have lifted that out. You're thinking as you're watching it. And I was thinking this time when Henry recounts that time that a guy shot in the hand, and he runs to the front of the restaurant and he uses all those aprons, and I can't remember what's the name of the guy. I can't remember, the one that basically yells at him, right?
Study or
the owner, right? He's like, I can't believe this kid, like we got to toughen him up. And I was thinking about it. The note that I had here is Henry's already toughened, because he's not disillusioned, but he's desensitized to this violence already. It doesn't matter to him because he wants the end game. He wants the money. He wants the power. So to get there isn't the problem. He just knows that he wants to get all those things, and maybe these are the things that he has to do.
Right.
So, and again, so there's that. I did like the when he gets pinched, like you're introduced to Tommy and all those things, and Jimmy, like Robert De Niro comes in, and then he gets pinched for selling the cigarettes, and he comes out, and that's when you get again, so many character-based dialogue scenes. When De Niro sits him down and says, "Never rat on your friends and keep your mouth shut," right? And so that tells you he's paranoid. That's his whole philosophy. Like, you just keep quiet and I'll be fine with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I like that they time jump, and that's when you see Ray Liotta is supposed to be 21, and Joe Pesci is also supposed to be 21, but it looks like he's 45.
I was going to mention that. They're in their 40s, obviously.
Yeah, but again, I'm glad that they didn't have the de-aging technology, because they probably would have tried that. I would rather just have the moment of he's not 21, you know what I mean, and then kind of
but then you get past that and you move on. But I will say this: I think the casting for the young Henry and the young Tommy was just awesome. I would definitely buy that was young Ray Liotta and that was young Joe Pesci. They look so much like him. It's perfect casting.
Yeah. So great. Again, it's very pervasive. Maybe not pervasive, persuasive. It enwraps you in that world. And then when I like that stuff where Tommy's trying to, again, there's a lot of funny scenes that are happening as a juxtaposition to the violence. Like when they have to burn down that restaurant, right? And they're outside chatting and they're yelling at each other about, I'm just asking you to do a favor. You just have to go on a double date. I laughed when Tommy's talking about, well, I have to go on this if she doesn't want to go by herself. And Henry intuits already. He's like, no, I'm not doing that. Right. And so I thought that was funny. And they're arguing, but then you see the buildings, the restaurant start to burn, the smoke come out, oh no, I can't believe you distracted me, that stuff. So that's funny. But he goes in, that's when he meets Karen. I like that he's kind of doesn't care about her until she asserts authority. He likes that she has an attitude, right? She can fight back. Yeah. Right. And so if we're again talking the visual language, we have to, every video essay that you watch on Goodfellas has to talk about that Copa oneer, the tracking shot to the back of the restaurant. Yeah. Right. What impresses you about that shot? Because again, when every time it happens, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And I'm always so impressed by the energy of it and basically the point of what they're doing. But what do you think?
Yeah, I enjoy that shot. It's fun for me because everything's so well choreographed, and the camera has to move a certain way, and the actors, the background actors, the extras have to make sure they're in their right spot at the right time, and it's definitely well rehearsed. And those kind of shots aren't easy, so it's impressive that they're able to choreograph what they did. I do remember thinking this time watching it, why are they just walking in circles? It feels if they're walking in circles in the kitchen, just take the straight shot to the kitchen. But instead of they keep turning around and then they turn around again, and you're like, did we just see that wall? Did we just see? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I remember thinking they just took too long to get through the kitchen. It could have been a quicker, straight shot to the whatever, the auditorium or something.
But usually when you watch these long tracking shots, or these oneers as they call them, right? I mean, they're so, it seems a lot of time when a filmmaker does that he's just, look what I can do. I can do this, this would be great. Yeah. And so that's it. And so it's kind of boring when it's that approach. I mean, it's impressive at first because the technicalities of doing that are amazing, off the charts, crazy, right? But what's great about this, and again, it's scored to, and then he kissed me, right? what's the name of the band? I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember.
I know the
but,
song though. Yeah.
yeah. Then he kissed me, right? It's set to that song, which again is commenting, and it's not. When Scorsese sat down to do the songs that he was going to use, he said he wanted to basically use it like first of all, he didn't want them to be anachronistic. Like the song had to exist by the time the scene took place. So you could go back to the 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever, right? And then use that stuff up to that point. But he didn't want to be anachronistic. He also wanted the music to comment on what's happening, but in an oblique way, to not be specific. And not say, find a song that says, oh, they're walking through the back of a restaurant, and isn't this a great shot? Like instead of doing that, and then He Kissed Me is basically about the being romanced and being wowed and being enticed by this world. But it's also showing you why Henry is tempted and enticed by this world, right? Because he's in charge. And the great thing about the shot is when you look at the history of it, I think Larry McConkie was the Steadicam operator. Scorsese kind of was doing his own thing and said, McConkie was like, do you mind if I work this out? And then he and Ray Liotta worked out this kind of weaving through the back of the restaurant kind of thing while Scorsese was doing something else. And so they were able to get all the details. And there's a point where McConkie says like he's trying to go downstairs, but they're going too fast. So he said to Liotta, can you do something, like have some business to slow it down so I have time to get down these stairs? And so there's a bunch of that they were trying to work out, weaving in and out through the restaurant and like talking to certain people, like having a couple like making out and having Henry like comment on like, what do you, again with you two, like, don't you have jobs or lives or something like that? So all the stuff they were working out, trying to make this work and not just be flashy, but to tell a story. And that's what it's doing. It's entrancing you with this. Okay.
Yeah.
And so they worked all this out. And then Scorsese came back to the set and they showed him that. And like McConkie and Liotta were nervous because what if all this work we put in is like Scorsese doesn't like it? But instead, I think Scorsese watched it. I think the story is he watched it quietly, and only at the end he went, no. And so they thought, oh, we've just blown it, right? But Scorsese didn't have any comments on what they're doing. He liked everything that we came up with, but he said, we just can't have them sit. I need to see the tables come floating in, like kind of flying in from off screen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because when Scorsese was growing up, and this is what we're talking about with the personal aspect of these movies, when he grew up in this Sicilian or Italian neighborhood and he would see all these gangsters and he would attend these clubs and these restaurants and have a front seat, but then when the gangsters would show up, the mafia, all of a sudden there were tables that were brought in front of them. And so he remembered specifically seeing these tables kind of float in to make room for these mafia members. So Scorsese was like, we have to have that. So it's not just Scorsese coming up with stuff. It's like a team effort to make sure that this happens. So again, you've got McConkie working with it. You've got Michael Chapman, the cinematographer, working with it. They're all working the stuff out to make it work and to tell a story. And then to have Scorsese come in and say, no, we need to make it personal. And this is the touch that it needs, right?
Right.
So it's so dynamic. And like I said, it's telling a story. And I think the only last thing is I think they had to do it a few times because whenever they would go through this complicated shot, they would get down and then Henny Youngman would mess up his joke and they'd have to start over again. And
That's the very end of the shot too.
Yeah, like do it a couple of times. So that was the only thing. But yeah, man, I know we talk about how impressive the tracking shots are, but this tracking shot is telling a freaking story. And again, I'm going to say this a lot. That's a freaking movie, right? It's not just there to be shown.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's great. And I like that he puts those personal touches on it too. I remember making one of my student films. I had a certain line that was in real life spoken to me and I put it in the script. And then the actress was like, do I have to say it like this or can I say this instead? And I was like, no, because that's what she said to me. So you got to say what she said. Yeah. Anyway, it's kind of fun when you're in the moment, putting those kind of personal touches on it. So I like that.
Yeah.
Well, we want to talk about the actors, I think. I mean, obviously De Niro brings his A game. I mean, he's so good in this movie. The scene I think of the most with him in this movie is when he finds out that, Pesci's been whacked and he slams the phone in the phone booth, and the way the camera zooms in real quick and he's just like going crazy on the phone. And then it's not like he breaks down and starts crying. He's trying to like not cry at the same time, but he keeps trying to. It's really impactful. And also I like Ray Liotta's reaction when he's like trying to comfort him, not quite sure how to comfort him. It's really kind of fun to watch. It's so well done. I love that scene. And And what's your thoughts on De Niro?
Well, it was interesting. Like I said, I've seen this maybe a dozen times since that first viewing. And, some movies you pick up on new stuff. Some movies you're just, again, nostalgic for the experience. You remember all this stuff. I was kind of surprised how much in the fringes De Niro is. If I'm looking at this movie, I think the people that are more front and center are Liotta, obviously, Bracco, obviously, and Pesci are the three main draws. I think, Sorvino's kind of on the fringes, but I was kind of surprised that, De Niro's not really, like, he's not front and center as much as I remember him being. He's more of a supporting player, even though he does make an impact.
He gets top billing, though. Yeah.
Yeah, he obviously, because it's De Niro, right? But it's just surprising that he's not quite as strong. I think it's just, and I don't mean that as a detriment. I just think that he's playing the character not showy, not trying to capture the attention. And that Jimmy character is more of a supporting player. He's not quite, you already have Tommy who's front and center that's teaching you like about the live wire violence that can break out. And so Jimmy has that same stuff, but he's more controlled. And then Paulie is more controlled than that. And so there's a lot of good dynamics. And then, like you said, that scene, like we talked about with Face Off, like the human drama kept grounding the ridiculousness of Face Off. And every time you get like a feeling, or you start to empathize with these characters, or before and after, maybe vice versa, that stuff, there's a burst of violence that kind of distances you from them again, right? Mm-hmm. So when Tommy gets whacked again, which is a masterful sequence, because we don't really see it coming because they're building like a hopeful sequence, but when he finds out that he's whacked, we feel sympathy for Jimmy, right? And it is because he was so excited about it, but he's just so emotional that he's lost kind of his son, right? Because of what happened with Billy Batts. And kind of, again, I have the note here, once they kill Billy Batts, that's kind of when everything starts going downhill. And that's when consequences start happening. But that's the long game. Like, we kind of forget about Billy Batts until you find out, he was killed because of this. It's like, oh my gosh. So the mob never forgets. But you do empathize wholeheartedly with De Niro in that part. But then again, he disappears. Like the next time you see him, like he's an old man, he's got the glasses, and he's yelling at Henry about how the silencers don't fit in the guns, that kind of thing. So again, kind of weird, not weird, but maybe a little bit different that De Niro kind of was on the fringes player this time.
Yeah, that's true. But he still sells it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's De Niro, right? Yeah. You can't. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ray Liotta, let's talk about him, because I think the story goes he really didn't want to be an actor, right? Like that wasn't his goal or focus in life, and he kind of fell into it. So because there's actors out there who that's their lifelong dream, and they don't quite get there, and then there's those who don't really want to do it and end up just that's what they do. Yeah. I think Hugh Grant's another one who kind of like didn't want to be an actor, or kind of just fell into it because he was helping his friend make a college student film or whatever, and now he's the famous actor.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think Ray Liotta was just awesome, and this is what first introduced me to him. I didn't really know him until, was Field of Dreams before this? Field of Dreams was before this, right?
Field of Dreams is the year before, right?
Okay. So I think this really kind of made Ray Liotta, and it kind of like shot him into the A-list as far as like, talented, good actors, and I think he's definitely one of them. And I've loved watching his career since then. I know he's since passed though, right?
Yeah.
But
I can't remember.
A good actor.
Yeah, I can't remember what he died of. But when he died, like we talked Robin Williams, like we talk Chadwick Boseman was another one who passed recently, and it was like, like they hit you really hard, right? But Ray Liotta, like when I heard that he'd passed, like he's not that old. I think he was in his maybe 60s, something like that. But obviously being in Field of Dreams as Shoeless Joe, Ray Liotta means something to me. I think the laugh, I know he was in Something Wild for Jonathan Demme, and that's kind of what got Scorsese's eye on him for this. But Field of Dreams is the one where I know him from that. Like he's Shoeless Joe. Like he's not Ray Liotta, he's Shoeless Joe, and he's got the laugh in the movie, and he's got like kind of a danger to him that kind of passes on to here. But, and again, it hit me really hard because like Shoeless Joe just died. Like he means a lot to me. But Ray Liotta is a good stalwart. Like when he showed up, he would do his job, and he'd do a great job at it. I am shocked. And again, I put zero stock in the Oscars, but I am shocked to find out that I don't think he was nominated for Best Actor for this. I know that Bracco was nominated. I know that Pesci was nominated, but Liotta, I don't think got a nomination. And his performance is so good because it tracks that desensitized, that bemused kind of attitude. Like when there's violence that happens in front of him, when Jimmy's choking Morty, because he's not paying him or whatever, and he's laughing, that kind of thing. He balances all that, and then when it goes to the last 40-minute stretch, the third act, which is the coked out paranoia, and again that goes back to, it's not just performance, because you buy that Liotta's coked out of his mind and he's paranoid, but it's not just the performance, it's also the filmmaking, because we go from these elegant tracking shots, and now in that last bit it's all really really quick and really rapid and jagged cuts, and the camera's it's restless and it's moving nonstop, and it's running all over the place, and he almost gets in the accident or whatever, almost hits the car because he's looking at the helicopters, and just that the filmmaking, man, sells that paranoia of that leading up to the bust when the FBI finally comes down on him, right? But it's all a mixture of things. Like you talk about Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight. It's not just Heath Ledger, it's Nolan, it's Wally Pfister, it's the writing that's all combined to make that so good. And I think Liotta's performance, he commands that screen. I can't get enough of his laugh. I can't get enough of his narration, and kind of how, again, ironic a lot of it is. The part when he gets out of jail and he finds out that Karen had dumped all the cocaine down the toilet, and there's that freak out. And the note I have here is he saying why because he's mad at her, or is he saying why because this is what his life has led to? You know what I mean? And it goes down to that, the final shot of him kind of just smiling at us and looking down at us in a way, right?
Yeah.
I just think Liotta's performance is off the charts great in this movie, and I love that he's able to just walk into a room with Pesci and De Niro and be able to hold his own against them. I don't know. It's great.
I definitely agree with that. I will say this about that scene when he kind of has that freak out. I always think this when I see this scene, and when she kind of crawls over to him and they kind of hug and they're both screaming, crying. It's so melodramatic, and it's so, I'm kind of I get it. I get that their world's falling apart. I get that, all the money he has now gone, but it's kind of I don't know. Not that it's not good. It's just kind of okay, I get it. That's really, really overdramatic. It's really overdone in that moment. I buy everything else. All the other scenes in the movie where they have the interactions and they yell at each other and they fight and all that stuff, I buy it. But in that scene, I go, come on, really? You're gonna get that overdramatic about this? I don't know. Maybe it's just because they're dramatic people, whatever. Anyway.
Well, we want to, I think maybe before we get to Pesci, we want to see into Bracco and kind of talk about her performance. But I think you're talking about that, and it's melodramatic. They're screaming at each other, they're crying, right? But in a movie, I think it's a crescendo. They're building to that moment. And again, the note that I wrote is it because of the situation or because of their life? What are they freaking out about? And it kind of leaves that up to you. It's the what is the price of the sin that they're committing, right? And so as far as a movie goes, I think it's justified. It is over the top, and they're not just screaming, but shrieking at each other and sobbing, and their eyes are just so red you can't even see their pupils, that kind of thing. But I think the movie's been building to that, so it is kind of earned, even though it's over the top. I mean, you don't want to just have them be bemused for the whole movie and kind of
I get that, and like I say, I understand why it is the way it is. It's just it always kind of makes me go,
you stop for a second. I agree. But Bracco, I like that it's not just a one-person narrative. I like that when she comes in, she starts narrating, because now you're getting, with Henry, you get the point of view of this is the life, and it's ironic because even though he's in love with that life, we're not. I get the idea that it's trying to romanticize. That's what people think it's doing, but it's doing it in a way that it makes it even uglier, that we shouldn't be wrapped up in this life. And to have her come in, and when she says, I should have run, but I gotta admit, it turned me on, that kind of thing. It gives you that different perspective. It gives you, is she the doting housewife? She gets uncomfortable when she goes to see the other mob bosses. It's interesting because in her performance, I don't know if there's a point where she turns, because they're in the Copa and she's like, what do you do for a living? She doesn't know he's a gangster. When she finds out he's a mobster, and again, we're being tantalized by the money in the wedding and all that. But is there, for you, first of all, what did you think of Bracco's performance? And was there for you a moment where you could tell that she switches and starts accepting that life? Because she seems resistant to it for quite a bit. But then by the time the paranoia thing comes along, she is Henry's partner in crime. and there's no
Right.
fighting back. So what do you think that
Well,
to your question?
first of all, I love her performance. I think it's very good. She's definitely a fun to watch. And I want to say this real quick. I love when she starts to narrate because it's a nice change of pace in the
Yeah.
movie at that time. And it's like right at the moment where the movie needs to have a change of pace. And so you're kind of, not that you're tired listening to Liotta's narration, but when she starts narrating and she kind of takes over and now it's her perspective, it's like, oh, it's kind of refreshing. It's kind of like, it's fun to kind of, you're almost starting over again. And so it's kind of
Yeah.
fun to go from her point of view from now on. And so I like that. And but I will say, I think the transition is gradual. I don't think she really knew what she was getting into. I think she was kind of pulled into it. She kind of like got wrapped up in, like I say, the money and the, getting to sit in the front row, all these like shows of whatever. She got wrapped up into it. She was pulled into it. It wasn't like a conscious decision, although it probably should have been. She should have like seen those red flags.
Yeah.
But the change from being, kind of unwilling at first to being like his partner in crime it was very gradual. And that's the way it is. It's always gradual. And so, like I said, she's accepted the life. She's accepted that this is what it is now. And now I'm, married to a drug dealer / murderer.
Yeah. And she kind of sees it as, like Henry sees it, like it's just a job. He's doing these things that put food on the table and provide for his family. And as long as that's what's happening, I think that's when she pushes back. Like she's the doting housewife, but when she finds out that he's having affairs, she won't stand for it because it's like, I'm putting in all this effort to support you.
Yeah.
And you're doing this thing, the side hustle.
Again, it goes back to her being, trying to get authority back. She's trying to regain her authority. And that's what he liked about her in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it's nice that she doesn't lose that.
Yeah. And that's a common complaint. People talk about like Scorsese being like infatuated with the blonde kind of goddess, right? You have Sharon Stone in Casino. You have Kathy Moriarty in Raging Bull. You have, for crying out loud, you have Michelle Pfeiffer in The Age of Innocence, right? This blonde. And I think he kind of treats her the same. This has been said a lot, but like how Alfred Hitchcock treats Kim Novak in Vertigo, that kind of thing. It's like you're infatuated with a certain kind of woman. And Bracco doesn't fit that description at all. She's dark haired. She's feisty. And it's about her. I know a lot of people say, well, I want Scorsese to talk about women and do something from a woman's perspective. But first of all, like, why would Scorsese need to do that? Like, he's doing it from his perspective. Like, why would he want to do it from a woman's perspective? It's going to take some of his persona out of it, right? But when somebody argues that, I think Bracco does that. That's her job. She has agency. She's in control. She fights back, right? She is that partner in crime. I think that's another thing why I think that's so refreshing is it's not just Henry's story, it's also her story. And you find out a lot of things from her perspective. And I think that's a strong narrative choice that another movie might not have chosen to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. As far as Joe Pesci goes though, this is the quintessential Joe Pesci movie. Like, this is what he's good at. Like he can play the, the wild, crazy, murderous, gangster really, really well. And so he's obviously a good choice for the character. And it's just, he has this pull too. Like you want to watch him when he's on screen, you want to watch him. And I love those scenes where he's telling those stories and everyone's calling him a funny guy and all that, because he is the funny guy in the group. And he is the guy that, is the, kind of the loudmouth, and, every group has those characters in their group. And it's fun to watch him play that character. And it's basically the same thing in Casino. And I love watching Casino for the same reason. Like I'm drawn to Pesci and I'm drawn to De Niro. And so when I watch Goodfellas and Casino, you get the same kind of like feel, you get the same kind of like, experience. And so the Casino and Goodfellas are probably my two favorite Scorsese movies. But again, Joe Pesci is just great in this movie.
Right. Well, it's funny to think that number one, the year before he was in Lethal Weapon 2 playing Leo Getz, kind of this like mousy kind of nothing, even though he's great, like we love him as Leo Getz, but he's like a non-threat. And to see him, and then Home Alone, obviously it's funny seeing him in the same year, kind of playing the same character, but just kind of a Looney Tunes version of Tommy. But he's so dynamic in this, but he's also terrifying. Like he's so volatile that he'll just fly at the handle. The "How am I funny" scene, right? Like funny how, like it's terrifying because even Henry doesn't know how to react. Like Henry says it himself, like at any moment, like these guys can go off. These are my friends, but at any moment we could start trying to kill each other. right?
I love the tension that is built in that scene too. I love where he just keeps pushing and then Reload's like, whoa, get the freak out of here.
Yeah.
It's like, I
Yeah.
love that build up. It's so great.
And the story is that wasn't in the book. It wasn't in the screenplay. And when they were doing that, I think Pesci kind of pulled Scorsese aside and said, when I was growing up, also in like an Italian kind of like neighborhood or something like that, I did hear this conversation in a restaurant where somebody was like, funny how, and it was very threatening. And Scorsese was like, let's put that in there. And so I think the story is they improvised it. Like the cast didn't know that's what they were going to do. So Liotta and Pesci improvised that whole scene and the uncomfortableness. And I think it's just it's potent and you feel it, right?
Yeah,
to the point where, Henry goes, get out of here, that kind of thing. And then they break. And it's funny because we're so scared of Pesci at one moment, but then we're laughing and we like him in another moment. When he like
in the very next moment, he's shattering glass over some guy's head.
Yeah.
He's getting other people. So it's like he's definitely volatile and he's
shooting spider in the foot. Right?
Yeah, he's unpredictable for sure.
Yeah. And then again, there's that part where he kills Spider. And then Henry has a moment where he's like, you killed him. Everybody else kind of just rolls their eyes, but like Henry's the one to go over it. It's the same intrinsic character as helping that guy that was shot in front of the restaurant. It's that same attitude and reaction that he's having. But again, Pesci's performance is so scary, funny, but also it's so haunting. It still haunts me to this day. When they bring him into that house and it slowly dawns on you what's happening, and then there's a subjective shot from Tommy's point of view where he looks around the room and realizes there's nobody here, and he just gets out of, oh no, and then he gets shot in the head.
Yeah, I love that.
So shocking, but haunting because we feel for him in that moment. It's scary.
Yeah.
Like, even though it's such an interesting dichotomy, because even though we're happy that Tommy is out of the picture because he's so scary, we still feel for him and empathize with him in that moment, even though it's at the
I feel bad for his mother.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Which is, by the way, Martin Scorsese's mother.
Kat, who does such a good job. And that's another scene where in any other movie, that scene would have been cut because it really serves no narrative purpose until you hammer down and they show that painting. And it's two dogs that are looking the other way. And then they see Billy Bats in the picture, right? And so, it looks like somebody we know. And so that's commenting on it. It's commenting on, again, it's such an entertaining, warm scene to watch. And Catherine Scorsese is so fun. And she's able to bounce off these. I think De Niro knew her. Pesci knew her, all this stuff. Liotta kind of is the outside man, but he's still... And
all that comes through in the scene, too. That all comes through in the familiarity with the characters and the, awkwardness with Reload's character. Yeah,
and there's a warmth there, but then the camera pans out to outside and you hear bats like banging on the inside of the trunk. It's that back and forth of these warm human moments with these terrifying, horrific, kind of, again, repulsive moments that distance you from the... So it's such an interesting movie from that point of view.
Yeah. One thing I will say, like there's two other movies I really like Joe Pesci in. I'm not a big Home Alone fan, but I do like a movie with honors. He plays like a bum with Brendan Fraser. He's really good in that movie. Like that movie makes me cry for some reason. But I also like My Cousin Vinny. Obviously, I think he's so funny in that. I never get tired of watching that movie. But if I pick my favorite Joe Pesci movie, Goodfellas, and second, Casino. Because he's just, again, terrifying as these characters that he plays. These crazy wild card murderous characters.
Either it's Tommy or Nicky.
He's so good at it.
Right. So, and then just a couple of shout outs. Paul Sorvino, obviously, I do like that he's not so much a moral center, but he is the moral center. Like if, at the end when he goes to see Paulie again and Paulie's like, if you just listen to me, I told you not to get involved in these things. You wouldn't be in this situation. Here's the last money I got. Now I got to turn my back on you. Right. It's like if Henry had just, it's a what if, like after all the temptation and after all this stuff has gone down, like Paulie's good enough that he treats Henry as a son. He's not going to just flat out whack him. I think in real life, even Henry Hill was like, I don't know why I didn't get killed. All my other friends got killed. I didn't get killed. I don't know why, all this stuff. But if he just stuck with Paulie, who in real life, I think was even more volatile than Jimmy or Tommy, that kind of thing. But I like that. I like all the, Debbie Mazar shows up for a little bit. I like, there's just, Scorsese's just populated this movie with so many people that are so believable and they just sell every moment. And I think, again, it's everything working together. Scorsese knows what the hell he's doing, right? He knows how to master his craft and how to master what's happening on screen.
Yeah. So. Again, why I think this is probably one of his best movies.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. So
well,
awesome.
anything else you want to mention before we move on?
Well, I do. Obviously, we love this movie. The thing, wow, the thing that I really love about this movie, like I said, is how much it envelops you in this world. There are so few movies that are able to sell that and pull you in. And you feel it. Like you feel kind of the joy of Henry being part of this world. And even though there's a lot of violence, he's still able to find the joys in it and with his family and stuff like that. And then it comes to the end, you feel that paranoia. You feel the walls closing in on him, right? You feel all this kind of cracking down. And I think it's after that that you get the scene where Karen goes to see Jimmy in the alleyway, right? It's after all that. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition about how like Henry's like, we can't do this, we can't do that. And Karen's like, Polly is right. Like all the drugs you're doing, it's warping your mind. And then the scene right after that, she's paranoid. And we don't know for sure if Jimmy was going to kill her, but it's the paranoia that's the point of that scene, right? It's about the walls closing in.
Right.
And so, like I was saying, Scorsese does so many things that you don't even realize he's got his hooks into you. I think we talked about this off air. The scene where Henry goes to see Jimmy in the restaurant, and it's just that 2-shot of them sitting at the table, right? But it's a dolly zoom. And again, for people that don't know, like a dolly zoom, they're dollying backwards, like they're pulling the camera backwards, but they're also zooming the camera in at the same time. It's the vertigo shot to bring that back, right? But it's so subtle. The whole point of that scene is not just them talking, they're filling each other out. But when you do that, and it's so subtle that you don't realize it's really happening, because it's not like all of a sudden a big jarring shift. It happens so slowly that the backgrounds outside the diner starts getting bigger as they get smaller. And it becomes such a claustrophobic moment. And again, the visual storytelling, a lot of filmmakers will not do that. A lot of filmmakers will just rely on the dialogue to tell you that's what's happening. Scorsese's not lazy, man. That's not what he does. Like he's doing these visual things to cue you in to what's happening. It's like the rapid cutting. It's like all the, using the romanticized 50s love songs to kind of show us like, oh, this is the good side of the mafia world. And then later in the 80s or the 70s, they start doing the psychedelic kind of Harry Nilsson kind of rock songs to make you like be paranoid. It's getting you to feel that. I don't know if I've seen another movie that's as strong as this, enveloping you in that world. Like I said, so at the end, I walk out going, oh, I don't want to do that. Right. So my question for you, I think the thing that I didn't so much struggle with, because I have no problem watching this movie. This is an easy watch for me, right? Because of the filmmaking. But when you compare this to like Casino, when you compare this to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, or even Requiem for a Dream, which I famously have never finished, because 45 minutes into the movie, I was like, yeah, drugs are bad. I've got other things to do. And so I turned it off. Because, Clockwork Orange, I don't know if you mentioned that before. That's a movie that I think I would count that as my least favorite movie of all time, just because I hate the way that it makes me feel, even though that's probably the point of it. But Clockwork Orange taught me that I can turn off a movie if I'm not liking it. I don't have to sit through this if I don't want. I'm not a major film critic. I'm not writing for a newspaper. I don't have deadlines. I guess I'm lucky, or maybe not lucky enough in that way, but I can turn a movie off if I'm not liking it. So my question for you is why? And Wolf of Wall Street is another one. I couldn't finish it because I was like, I get it. Like, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And like, I get it. I don't need to sit through another hour and a half of this. Right. And that's like 3 hours of debauchery, that kind of thing. But why is it I can sit through this? Why is it I can hear the F-bomb drop, 175, 200 times, and it doesn't bother me in this movie? And I can watch from the beginning to the end, even though it makes me feel uncomfortable. But I can't watch a Casino. I can't watch a Requiem for a Dream. What do you think the difference is? Why is that?
I don't know, but I do understand what you're talking about. Like, I do know that there are movies out there that you don't have to finish. You get the point really, really early on, and you don't need to keep watching it. So I understand that. But I think it's probably the characters, or maybe just this world that you're kind of drawn into. It's kind of like Karen's character. She's drawn into it. She's drawn into the money and the prestige and all that stuff. And then maybe it's the same for us as film watchers, is that we're kind of sucked into it and we're kind of brought into this world, and we kind of, for me, I get fascinated by it because it's so foreign to me. It's not the way I live my life at all. It's completely opposite of my life. And so my wife always jokes that I want to be like a wannabe gangster. I've always wanted to be it's like, it's not that I want to be a gangster. I don't want to be an evil person that does these terrible things.
Yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated by just the lifestyle they live and like how they're able to do that, because it's just so foreign to me. But maybe that's it. Maybe it's just because it's like so fascinating.
I also think that maybe the filmmaking is so subtle that it's not so much in your face. Like the story and the performances are in your face. But Requiem for a Dream is so showy that I think it's more impressed with itself than I'm impressed with it.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I will say that I'm impressed with Requiem for a Dream's filmmaking, though. Like there's some really cool stuff that they do in that movie.
Right. I mean, and that's
very notable.
When I say that doesn't mean that you can't like it, right? I think that's another problem. That's another problem with today's culture, is that if I criticize something, somebody's going to take offense to it and say, "Oh, so you're saying I can't enjoy it?" I was like, "No, I'm telling you my perspective."
I will agree with you though. There is a moment in Requiem for a Dream where you just you can turn it off. Like you get the point. Maybe for me, it's more like 3/4 of the way in. You're like up like a quarter of the way in, but about 3/4 through, you're like, okay, now I know. I mean, I can turn it off now. I totally get that.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. I just think even though there's a lot of showiness to this movie, I think it's done in such a way that it's like it happens with Henry. It like kind of sneaks up on you and it kind of entrances you and kind of, like I said, envelops you in that world. And when I talk about maybe the issues I have with this, I just think that you could maybe cut 10-15 minutes out of this movie because it gets repetitive a little bit, because you have the scene where Tommy shoots Spider, and Henry has that reaction, but then the next scene is just business as usual. Like there doesn't seem to be a real, like, I think even at the end when he says, like you said with the spaghetti, is like what is it that he says, like macaroni and
egg noodles,
ketchup, that kind of thing. And what's funny is that he doesn't really learn anything. At the end of the movie, he's like, I have to wait in lines. Like I have a regular job. Like I can't have spaghetti. It's like, I have to live life like a schnook. Like I have to live it like you.
You can feeling he'd go back to that life in a second if he could.
Yeah. And so in a way, I get that it's trying to make a comment on that. But as far as like character growth goes, it's like we sat through a 2.5-hour movie and he doesn't really learn anything. You know what I mean? He kind of sticks with, even though, you know what I mean? That's the point of what the movie's making. But there is a part of me that's like, well, I do kind of want to see some kind of character growth, like some kind of change in him. Even in real life, Henry Hill, he was in witness protection. He went back to a life of crime. He started dealing drugs. He kept getting in so much trouble that they kicked him out, right? And so it is a comment on the life. But as far as movies go, I think maybe I just needed a little more lessons learned as opposed to just it stopping. So
I can see that.
That's my only drawback with the movie. Other than that, this is a freaking movie. I can't say that enough. Like it's so alive. This movie is so alive with so much energy, so much purpose. Every scene, every shot has a purpose. Every needle drop, every line of dialogue. Wow, what a movie! So.
Yep, I agree. All right, well, that will do it for Goodfellas, I think. Hey, we were talking about possibly doing our favorite mob movies or our favorite Scorsese movies. Which one do you want to do?
Well, I think because we've been talking about what we want to do for our next season, and there's a certain movie I think that we want to chat about that if we're going to tackle a different decade. So I think instead of talking about gangster movies, let's just do our top Scorsese movies and just kind of maybe have a conversation about that. So
all right, then we'll come back and do our top 3 Martin Scorsese pictures, and we'll be back real soon.
All right.
Okay, we're back. So we decided we're going to talk about our top 3 Martin Scorsese pictures. Darin, we had a lot of fun talking about Scorsese during the meet, but I think I probably mentioned what mine were already. So let's start with you, and let's go with your number 3 Scorsese movie.
Okay, well, I just want to say that Goodfellas just missed my top 3. Goodfellas is my number 4. Like out of all the movies that he's done, again, it's, as far as gangster movies go, you can't do, unless you're The Godfather, like you can't do much better than this. You know what I mean? But number 3, I've got Raging Bull.
Okay.
Number 1, it has, literally, no hyperbole, I think Raging Bull has the greatest male performance in a movie I've ever seen. Just the way Robert De Niro was able to, he gained all the weight or lost all the weight and be fighting shape, that kind of thing. It's a masterful performance, but it also does that thing that Scorsese always does of, we don't have to like these characters to find them compelling. right? I think Jake LaMotta, to borrow a term we used during our Godfather conversation, he's a repulsive man, a repulsive character. I don't like him, but it's compelling as hell watching him try to balance everything and just rip his own life apart because he's so imbalanced and he's just so fragile of a man, even though he's a boxer, right? But there's also so much freaking visual language to every one of those. Like every boxing scene has a different story that it's trying to tell. It's just masterful. The black and white cinematography. Again, we didn't mention Thelma Shoemaker, who's his I think his lifetime editor ever since he's been making movies. Shoemaker, who's married to Michael Powell, one of the Powell and Pressburger, those filmmakers who Scorsese fell in love with. She's married to Michael Powell, and that's how they got introduced. But she's edited every single one of his movies, I believe, up to, even The Irishman. I think she even edited that. But like, just the editing and all the editing choices, everything in Raging Bull is telling the story. I just think it's masterful. It's wow. Again, what a movie.
Yeah. Another vehicle with Pesci and De Niro together again, which is also, their dynamic on screen is, you can't deny that. They're really good together. So good pick. I didn't pick Raging Bull, but I picked one that, also is kind of hard to watch. Taxi Driver, De Niro again. Yeah. I think awesome performance by De Niro. Also, I don't know what it is about this movie. Even though it's dark, it's heavy, it's kind of hard to watch. I can't pull myself away from watching it when it's on. Like I not as much as Goodfellas, but I'm intrigued by this character, even though he, like you mentioned with Jake LaMotta, he's not a good person, but I'm intrigued by what he's doing and his decisions he's making. And you watch it and you go, man, that's just not a good choice, but you're watching it and it's like so compelling. But again, De Niro's performance, I like watching Harvey Keitel get comeuppance in the end. That's always fun for me. But yeah, Taxi Driver.
Okay. Well, my number 2 is also Taxi Driver.
Okay.
And again, it's the visual language. It's like the purgatory, right? I think The Searchers is where Scorsese got the influence from this. But yeah, Travis Bickle is not a sound mind, right? If you're talking visual language, when he goes to see the Sybil Shepherd character and he takes her to the porno because that's what he thinks a date is or whatever, and he doesn't understand why she's pushing back against that. And the visual language of him calling her on that phone in his, the dilapidated motel that he lives, and the way that the camera moves away. And again, I'm not saying anything that nobody said before here, because every video essay talks about the shot, but it is, the camera becomes a character and it steps away from their conversation because we can't bear to hear the pain that he's going through. But yeah, Bickle goes through so many, he tries to date her. He's obviously seeing all the filth and he has that narration. He tries to be a political assassin. That doesn't work out. Then he tries to be the savior of the Jodie Foster character, who's a prostitute and goes after Keitel. What I think is fascinating is the ending. You could take it literally, or you could take it as I almost knocked over a microphone, but you could take it as like a dream. But when he's able to go in and he does accomplish his goal of saving the Jodie Foster character, he does it by murdering people, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same thing as Henry Hill in this. It's like, one thing I didn't mention talking about Goodfellas, the whole movie feels like a confession. It feels like Henry Hill's telling us the story. And then when he literally breaks the fourth wall and makes it literal and he starts talking to us, and again, a masterful shot of when you follow Henry Hill down off of the stand in the courtroom and he's talking to us, and it's, again, full on. It's that kind of a fantasy thing where Henry's going to have to pay for it now. He's going to have to answer for everything. And it's the same thing with Bickle when he's able to save her, but then it has the shot of, is everything fine? And I think it's not so much a dream of when Bickle goes back in the taxi and you get the sound again of his craziness and he turns the rearview mirror away from him. So he kind of avoids that. Mm-hmm. He is over whatever he was going through at that moment. And he is kind of reveling in the heroism, the vigilantism, but it's still going to be there. That ugliness is still going to be there. I just think that it's such a fascinating movie. Fantastically shot, fantastically written, just brilliant. Paul Schrader screenplay, great stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned my number 2 in the meat, and that is Casino. And Casino's on there because just kind of like Goodfellas, it does kind of follow different perspectives. You see, De Niro's perspective, then Pesci's, and then, his wife as well. And it's fun to have that change in perspective throughout the movie. And also, I'm a big fan of Vegas. I do like playing poker. And so it's fun to kind of like just be in that world too. It's, now you got the mafia world that I'm fascinated by. And then you got the world of, gambling and, poker and all that stuff. And so that's fun for me too. So I won't say Casino. Also, the screenplay Casino, it's so well done. And Sharon Stone, she's amazing in this movie. Like I love watching her performance in this movie. So that's definitely number 2 on my list.
Well, I know we talked about it just really briefly. I know you like Casino, and I know I mentioned that it's, to me, I get it. I get it, it's great. But to me, like watching it, it just seemed like Goodfellas again, right?
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of stuff has happened where Pesci's playing the same character. It's got the same narration, just without Liotta. It's got De Niro this time. And to the idea where Pesci's playing Nicky is the same thing, but then Frank Vincent kills him. Like, it's very meta kind of thing, right? And so and to me, I think Sharon Stone is she's there. A lot of her performance seems very shrill to me. But it's just the way that I approached it, I guess. I didn't watch it at the right time. Maybe I need to watch it again, but it just seemed like Goodfellas light. It was doing a lot of the same exact.
I can see that. I can see why you think that.
Yeah, and it's just really long. But I still, again, I'm not saying this to say that's a terrible choice. I just think that, yeah, great.
Oh,
Casino, people are going to love that. So
yeah.
So my number 1, it's an interesting, because when I think of especially Scorsese, or especially Spielberg, or especially like Coppola, all these things, their best movies are the ones where it is fully them. Like, a masterpiece to me is a movie that it's fully the director. This is if you want to know about the director, you just have to watch this movie. It's all of his foibles and his faults and his fears and his strengths, everything laid bare. So I've got The Last Temptation of Christ.
I knew that was going to be it. I knew.
Just because, and I know it's controversial, which is weird, because if you look at the history of it, people were picketing this movie even though they hadn't seen it or read the book. It was just the fact that they were dealing with the story of Jesus Christ, and it wasn't told in the canonical kind of Catholic way, right, that it's normally told. But it is, again, it's Scorsese laid bare. It's his Catholicism on the screen, dealing with all these things. And the way that the movie is shot so sparingly, it's shot so sparingly that it's gorgeous without trying to be gorgeous. It's a beautiful movie to kind of feel. But I just take it as a story about Jesus. I don't think this is like the Jesus story. You know what I mean? I don't think of this as the Bible and like an adaptation of that. I'm fascinated about the idea of this Messiah that's conflicted. Like, you don't know enough about, Jesus is born, he disappears, 33 years later, he shows up and he's like doing all this Jesus stuff, right? But I like the idea of taking those in-between years and say, well, how did he get to that point, right? Did he just accept it, or was he fighting with it? And I love the idea of Judas Iscariot, the Harvey Keitel character. He has to fulfill this duty because that's what's been prophesied. Even though they're friends, he has to do it, because if he doesn't, then all this stuff that needs to happen or come to fruition won't happen. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of Jesus being tempted on the cross by Satan. If you come down, you're going to have all these things that your life will have. And that whole last section deals with that. But then Judas comes in at the last little bit to yell at him and say, I sacrificed for you, and you're doing this. I made the sacrifice, and you're not fulfilling your end of the bargain. And just spoilers, Jesus is able to break it, and he's back on the cross. And it's like, thy work is done, right? I just find that stuff so fascinating. But again, that's Scorsese. More than any other movie that he's made. I know that Taxi Driver and Goodfellas, and Raging Bull, and Cape Fear even has the redemption and the story of sinners, right? Jesus is dealing with the ultimate sinners, but he's also feeling like he's a sinner. I don't know. It's just endlessly fascinating. It's just a fantastic, fantastic movie experience.
Yeah. Well, I've only seen it once, so I don't remember too much about it, but I'll have to watch it again with your perspective. My number 1, I bet you can't guess what it's going to be.
Something to do with the mafia.
Yeah, Goodfellas.
Right. Yeah, we mentioned that. So are there any final words that you wanted to say about Goodfellas that you weren't able to say during the...
Just that I think it's Scorsese at his best. It's De Niro, Pesci, and Ray Liotta and Lorraine Bracco. They're all at their best. Everyone's doing their very best work in this movie, and that's why it's so well done, why it came together the way it did.
Yeah.
A lot of talented people working together, making a really great product, and it shows.
Okay, awesome.
So that's Goodfellas. What's next?
Well, I think we're going to go a little bit lighter. You want to do something but there is a connection, because Paul Sorvino is in this movie. Paul Sorvino is going to be in our next movie. We're going to be covering The Rocketeer. Okay. I know it's, there's stuff going on, superhero movies, Scorsese, that kind of thing. We haven't really covered. I know we covered like Popeye, right? As far as comic book, have we covered any other comic book movie stuff besides that?
I think so. I can't think of one right now, but I think so.
Okay, there's probably something in there that deals with that. But I think for the 90s movies, you had like Batman that came out, and all of a sudden all these pulpy heroes, instead of like a Superman movie and a Green Lantern movie, all of a sudden we just had pulp heroes like the Shadow and the Phantom and Dick Tracy. It's like, where are the superheroes, right? So I think I wanted, and even though The Rocketeer kind of fits into that, the Joe Johnston film, I did want to tackle what I think is maybe the best superhero movie of the 90s. Or comic book movie. And we've got a guest. She's known as the Girly Nerd on Twitter. Her name is Marianne Peluso. She's a great, fun writer, and we become, again, really good friends on Twitter. She writes for Wealth of Geeks, The Nerd Machine. She's written for a bunch. She's just churning out articles. And she's just so, I don't know, sincere and earnest, and she knows what she's talking about. She talks about older movies, newer movies. She has the broad spectrum. And so we've been chatting about bringing her on, and she's like, well, I'd love to come on sometime. And I was like, well, I don't know if we can fit you in this season, but yeah, I did want to chat about a superhero movie, and The Rocketeer is the one that she wanted to chat about. So we'll be tackling that 1991 movie, Billy Campbell, Jennifer Connelly, Timothy Dalton, and then Paul Sorvino. So I think that'll be a fun conversation, kind of lighter than this, even though it does have gangsters in it.
Yeah, no, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then for NostalgiaCast, I am Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lemberg.
And go home and get your shinebox.
What am I funny? Like, am I funny to you? Like, funny how? Like, funny, am I just funny, like shining your shoes funny? Or like, what are you talking about? What's so funny about me? Anyway, was that as threatening as Joe Pesci?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Close.